Hello students, welcome to week 2 on the course Introduction to Conflict Resolution Processes 1. I'm your facilitator and my name is Antonia Okoye. The topic for today is insight into conflict resolution and processes. And our focus will be on what is conflict resolution, how is it applied, where is it applied, why is it applied, and who applies it. And I hope at the end of this lesson we'll have come to a better understanding of its influence in all that we do. So let's get to class. So back to class now. As I've said, our topic for today is insight into conflict resolution and processes. We have 3 objectives again for this lesson, and they are: number 1, to explain what is conflict resolution, to explain conflict resolution processes, and also to look at approaches to conflict resolution. But before we start, we'll quickly do a recap on our last lesson where we talked about what conflict is, and we were able to define conflict as a situation affecting an individual or a disagreement between 2 or more persons or groups over incompatible goals, ideas, interests, ideologies, values, which, if not quickly addressed, can lead to destructive consequences and ultimately death. So how does this conflict affect a society? It can affect a society positively, or it can affect a society negatively if it is not addressed properly. So this brings us to our next objective for this lesson, which is what is conflict resolution. We know conflict resolution is the process of managing a conflict and negotiating a solution. And in the conflict resolution process, there are 2 elements, and they are management and negotiation. The first element, management, is to try and cool down the temperature of the conflict. At this point, when conflict is ongoing, people are angry, tempers are flaring, abuses are going on, arguments are going on. So the first thing that needs to be done is to first cool the temperature down. Then the next element, or what needs to be done in a conflict resolution process, is now what is called negotiation. This is where parties in conflict will now try to negotiate their own outcome, to try to address those things that are very important to them. So our next objective, as I've highlighted earlier, is to now look at the processes of conflict resolution. And we have many conflict resolution processes, and they include negotiation, mediation, arbitration, conciliation, independent expert inquiry, diplomacy, litigation. And all these conflict resolution processes are called alternative dispute resolution, except for litigation. So the first conflict resolution process we'll be looking at is called negotiation, and this is a process whereby parties in conflict will try to resolve their issue by themselves. This is the first step in a conflict resolution process, where individuals who are in conflict will come by their own self, come together to try to solve their problem, and they may decide to hire an attorney to represent in a case where somebody feels, okay, I cannot negotiate very well for myself. They can hire an attorney who will stand in their stead. The person will act in proxy for them. The attorney is not a third party representative. He is just there to advance the interests of the party is representing. So, and this negotiation can occur in any place. It can occur in your living room, in your company, in your boardroom. As far as the place is convenient, negotiation can occur at any place. The next negotiation conflict resolution process we are going to look at is mediation. This mediation is a step that occurs after negotiation. You know, people, as I said the first time, that people would make efforts to try to resolve their problem. But in a case where they are incapable of doing that, the next step that will be appropriate now is mediation. This is the mediation process is a process whereby an impartial person tries to help them to resolve their problems. He will try to reconcile them, especially when they are not on talking terms anymore. They are not communicating with each other. So his purpose is just to help them to reach a mutually acceptable agreement. And the mediator, as I've said, is a very impartial, neutral person. He does not get involved, being partisan or trying to support one person against the other. Because if he is viewed as such, the conflict resolution process will definitely fail. And another important point we have to look at in mediation is that a mediator does not impose himself. The party in conflict would decide, okay, we need a mediator. Probably a mediator can be somebody that is provided by the government or a private person. For instance, you see your friends are in conflict and you decide to step in. First, you will go to one. I want to settle this problem between you and this. If he says, okay, go ahead, then you go ahead. But if he says, no, I'm not interested, definitely the process is not going to work. So a mediator does not impose himself. All he does is try to reconcile the parties in conflict. The mediation, is a process that is very cost effective, and it is very flexible. It's not formal, it's not rigid. It allows for convenience of the parties involved. Unlike litigation that is very formal, there is a specific time when the court section is fixed, you need to be there. But mediation is not like that. It allows for flexibility. Party can choose the time they want to come together to resolve their problem. The atmosphere is amiable. There's confidentiality. And parties are well represented. What we need to understand in this mediation is that the decision arrived at the mediation process is not binding. It can only be binding if the parties involved in the conflict have already agreed before the process starts that whatever they agree is going to be binding. Because if not, at the end of the process, a party, one of the party can say, I am not satisfied with this process, I'm not satisfied with this outcome, and he may decide to seek other process of conflict resolution. So mediation is not a binding agreement on parties in conflict. The next conflict resolution process we are going to look at is arbitration. And arbitration is a process where people in conflict will decide that, okay, we want to solve this problem. Mediation has failed, negotiation has failed, but let us look for an arbitrator who will decide this case for us. But there is a clause to this arbitration. You cannot, submit yourself to arbitration and an agreement is reached and you say, I'm not going to abide by the agreement. So the agreement in arbitration is binding, and arbitration is so similar to litigation. The only difference is that it is out of court method for resolving a conflict. The arbitrator is the one who decides what happens. He listens to both sides and he will make a decision. So whatever he comes, whatever he arrives at will be what will actually happen in the conflict situation. So an arbitrator controls the process and he makes decision. The next conflict resolution process we are going to look at now is conciliation. Conciliation is also a third-party conflict resolution process. A neutral and independent third party comes in to try to settle the differences between people. But this third party can be provided by the state, or it can be a private person, as I've earlier explained. A private person, you see conflict between your friends and you try to come in, but most importantly, they must agree to your intervention. If they do not agree, you cannot just come in and say, oh, I want to resolve this problem, because it will now means that you are imposing yourself into their situations. So this conciliation, as I said, is similar to mediation. All the conciliator does is try to suggest options for the parties in conflict. When people are in conflict, they try to be rigid. They try to stand on what they want. Okay, this is what I want, and I'm not going to go for less. But the work of a conciliator, he tries to, bring several options before them and try to say, okay, why don't you look at this option? Do you actually think you need what you think, that thing that you are insisting on? Why don't you think, or why don't you take this other option? And the parties in conflict will, go, they will review it, think about it. If it is favorable to them, they will now take the suggestion and come to an agreement, and the problem will not be resolved. One beautiful thing about conciliation is that, and mediation, is that the process leads to what is known as a win-win situation. There is a close relationship after the whole conflict resolution process. It does not lead to bad blood between parties in conflict, unlike arbitration sometimes, and the next conflict resolution process that we are going to look at, which is litigation. So these two always lead to what we call win-lose outcome for the parties in conflict. The next conflict resolution process we are going to look at is litigation, and this is the most familiar type of conflict resolution process, because it involves a defendant facing off against a plaintiff, or either before a judge or before a judge and a jury. So as I've said, the judge or the judge and the jury, they decide the case. Whatever sentence they give, it is enforced. It can be enforceable. So when it arrives that you cannot say, okay, I don't want this decision, as far as and it does not really require the consent of any party for the judge to impose himself. In this process, the judge imposes himself. He decides the case, he listens, he decides the process, everything. The parties in conflict, they do not decide any outcome in this situation, and it's usually, as I've said, leads to win or lose situation. There's a saying that if you take after court, there is no more friendship. Anybody who takes you to court after that, when the case is decided, this relationship is forever destroyed. But perhaps you still have an option. If, for instance, you are not satisfied with the ruling of the judge or jury, you can go to the next step of justice, which is appeal to an appellate court to decide the case. And if you are still not satisfied, you can still go to the Supreme Court. The next conflict resolution process we are going to look at is independent expert inquiry. This is a conflict resolution process that is usually commissioned on a fact-finding mission on the root causes of a particular conflict, with the purpose of arriving at a recommendation on the conflict. So as I said, this particular independent expert inquiry is usually commissioned probably by a state or an organization to look at the root cause of a particular conflict, and the independent inquirer will go into the conflict situation, look at it, assess it, listen to the different side, come to a conclusion. They will not make a recommendation to the people or the organization or the state government that commissioned them, and those people will not take the necessary actions. Uh, Diplomacy is the last conflict resolution process that we are going to look at, and simply putting it, it's a process where sovereign nations, try to resolve their problems. So as you can see from the picture, you see the world peace is dependent, and for there to be peace, countries must be at peace with each other, and this they can achieve by signing treaties with each other, having diplomatic ties. When the diplomatic ties are broken, the first thing you notice is that they will first start withdrawing their embassy from the other country, or they will withdraw. That means the diplomatic ties has been broken. This now brings us to our last objective for this lesson, and it is conflict resolution approaches. What we have to understand about conflict resolution approaches is that for every particular conflict situation, we do not behave the same way. So we are going to look at how we behave in a different conflict situation. The first one we'll be looking at is forcing, and is commonly also known as competing. This is where a situation where an individual will try to impose himself on others. His own interest is what is paramount to him, and the other person must accept it. And forcing can also be used in two ways. It can also be used by the other party who is being oppressed to resist the oppression of the first party. So forcing can be used in two ways. The next conflict resolution approach that we'll be looking at is collaborating, and it's considered the best conflict approach because it helps conflicting parties to come together to resolve their problem. It is also known as problem solving. They come together, they reach a very favorable, mutually acceptable agreement. The next conflict resolution approach we are going to look at is compromising. Compromising is a situation where maybe one of the party in conflict will just want to give up all those things that are important to him, probably his values, his interest. You know what this usually leads to? It's like you are pushing the evil day, because on the long run, one day you will still realize that those things that you have given up are very important to you, and the conflict will arise again. So it's not usually a good way of or reacting in a conflict situation. The next one we are going to look at is withdrawing. This is also known as avoiding. We have a lot of people who will naturally not want any trouble. That is their key, and they don't join issues with people. When when it gets to argument, they just withdraw. When it gets to fight, they withdraw. Even if they are being beaten or slapped, they withdraw. So this is not a very good conflict resolution approach, because it usually leads it's like saying you are sweeping the dirt under the carpet. One day it will turn to a heap. One day, definitely the person will react, and it will still result back to what we have earlier explained, which is forcing. So the last conflict resolution process we are going to look at is smoothing. It's very close to compromising, because now in this situation you try to put the needs of other above your own needs, your own interest. You compromise it. You put the interest of the others above your own, and it's not a good approach to conflict, because people tend to take advantage of a situation like this. Because if somebody regards it that he's always accepting whatever he does, they will force things down your throat that you naturally will not want to take. They will take advantage of you. So smoothing is not always the best approach, but sometimes you may use smoothing, maybe for instance what the other party is crying for or demanding, you don't actually need it. So you may decide, okay, let it go. So smoothing works in such a way too. But from all these conflict resolution processes we have discussed, the most appropriate conflict resolution approach is collaborating where conflict is actually faced. It is placed on the table and it is resolved. So we have come to the end of the lesson. I've been able to look at what is conflict resolution. We've been able to look at the processes of conflict resolution, and we have been able to look at the approaches to conflict. So we have looked at all these things, and we should know that these skills are very important for us to be able to negotiate a favorable outcome for our own interest. So bye for now. See you in the next lesson.